Hi there folks, in today's demonstration I'm going to show you how to build a quiz app in Power Apps. So if you've ever become frustrated by using Microsoft Forms for your quizzes, maybe it's time you start building a Power App to do this for you and start using dynamic data sources so that you can define your questions and answers in a data source like a SharePoint list. So that's exactly what I'm going to demonstrate to you today. I have an app pre-built on screen right now. It's a quiz and it's asking me questions about the Power Platform, making sure I know what the different answers are, and we'll go ahead and make some right and wrong answers. And when I hit submit, you'll see that unfortunately I didn't make the grade and I'm going to have to take this test again. But over on the right hand side, I have my data source, I have my questions, I have my answers, and this app is pulling these questions and answers directly from this list. So there's plenty of opportunities to extend this further, and I'll talk about that within the video. But if you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's jump into the demonstration. So I'm going to start things off from make.powerapps.com. I'm going to create a blank canvas app, and I've named my app my first quiz app and select create. Now before I get started with building the app, I'm going to jump across onto my SharePoint site where I've got two lists. The first of which is my questions and answers that I'm going to use for my quiz. Now you'll see I've got a column called question. Those are each of the questions that the user will be asked. I've then got 4 columns with all the answers from answer A through to answer D. For the purpose of this demonstration, all the correct answers are in the answer A column, but that's for a reason. It means I can check answer A for the correct answer, but within the Power App, I'm actually going to shuffle up these answers so that the end user doesn't know that, of course, answer A is always the correct answer. Now you could do this slightly different. You could have an additional column in your list that identifies the correct answer. Other things that are possible within this list, and it's maybe something I'll cover in a future video, you could potentially have a column that relates all these questions to its own quiz. So then you could store multiple quizzes and therefore multiple questions for each of those quizzes, and have within your Power App the ability to select the quiz that you want to complete. In addition to this, I have my second list, which is used for responses. So anyone that completes the quiz in today's app will have their response and their score stored in a list. You could of course extend this to include a certificate or an automatic email to let someone know if they've passed or if they've failed. Again, if there's interest in the comments, I'll maybe cover that in a future video. Jumping back into our Power App though, the first thing that we need to do is to attach our data source, and I'm going to go and search for SharePoint, select the connector, select a connection, and then we'll hunt down the dynamic quiz site and select the 2 lists that I've just previously demonstrated and connect them to our app. If we then jump across onto the tree view, we can see how our app is built out and the different controls we add. And the first control I want to add is the gallery, and we'll select the vertical gallery. And with the gallery inserted, if we attach it to our questions list, we can see those questions coming through. I'm going to resize that slightly to use more of the screen. And the other thing I'm going to do is to change the layout so it just shows the title. And that title is our question. Now again, a little bit of shuffling about. I'm going to center the text, so the question's in the middle. I'll drag that to the top of our gallery control. I'm also going to resize the individual gallery, so we've got a bit of space there for the answers. And then on the left hand side, I'm going to delete some of these different controls that have been automatically inserted, the rectangle, the separator, and the next arrow. So all we've now got is the title in our repeating gallery. Now best practices are to rename these, so I'll rename my gallery to Gal Quiz, and the label that we have here is LBL for label, and we will call that the quiz question. So next up, what I want to do is I want to insert a radio control with the 4 questions. So make sure that you're editing the individual repeating gallery, and if I go to insert and expand input, we can see we have the radio box here, and that has already inserted a sample data set. But what we're wanting to do is to display the different questions. Now before I attach the data source for the different questions, I actually want to restructure that data so those questions are jumbled. So there's nothing to do at this point in time other than potentially resize this so there is space for the 4 answers that we have on our quiz. Again, I'll rename this individual control, so we call it rad and then quiz answers, and that'll help us with our expressions, etc. later on. So in terms of data sources, if I select the gallery and have a look at this questions data source and pop that open, we can see we've got our answer A, B, C, D, and we'll have somewhere along here the question, but we know we've got that already because title has come through. And I'm going to make changes to the structure of this data source and add it into a collection. Now the reason I'm adding it into a collection is so that I can reshape the data. I basically want these answer A, B, C, D to be shuffled, and it would be quite nice if the data source, rather than referring to the question as title, it referred to it as question, and that'll make, again, some of our expressions a bit easier later on. So in order to collect that, I want to do it when someone navigates to the screen, and that can be done by selecting the screen and then navigating to the onVisible. And it's here that we can define our collection. The other place we could do it is on App Start. Thinking long term, I'm expecting us to be able to have a welcome screen, and when you select the quiz from that welcome screen, we'll then run the clear collect on the onVisible of this next screen that will then clear and collect the data based on the quiz that's been selected and the filter that's applied to our SharePoint list. But like I said earlier, this is something I'll maybe cover in a later video. And if I type in clear collect, I want to define my own collection, so I'm going to call that call questions and then put in a comma, and then if I use shift and enter, I can return down and start adding in the rest of my expression, which is to add columns, because I want to take the original data source, which is our questions list from the SharePoint site, and then I want to define some new columns and the data sources for those columns because I'm restructuring this data. So I'm going to add in a question column, and that question column is going to be based on the title of our data source. So where we saw the title in our questions data source, it will now be called question rather than title. You'll note that I'm jumping down onto different rows here at shift and enter. I now want to define my answers column, and that answers column is going to be based on the shuffled questions from A through to D. So I'm going to add in shuffle, an opening bracket, and that is going to be a shuffled table. So I'll use table again with an opening bracket, and then I want to define the structure of that table, or the rows within that table, and I do that using these curly brackets. I want the value to be called answer, and I want the value to be answer A, and that's the first value. I can put in the closing bracket and a comma, and then if I use shift and my cursor, I can highlight that, Control C to copy. I can go to the end and paste and change that to answer B. Again, go to the end and paste and change that to answer C, and of course go to the end and paste and put that to answer D. Delete that trailing comma there, and then put in place all your closing brackets, I think of which there are 4. And if everything's good, we can go to format text, and we now have our clear collect. Now, of course, this only runs when we navigate to this screen. So at the moment, if I double click on this, do I have a data source? I don't. So in order to test this, if I go back to my tree view, and if I add in a new screen, if I click on that screen and then click on back onto screen 1, that'll trigger the onVisible. And if I double click on the collection, we can pop that open. And whilst we still have answer A through to D, we now have an answers table. And if I scroll across to the right, we will also have a question column as well as our original title. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we tidied up the structure even more so that we only had the question column and the answer table, and then we would simplify the data source that we've put into our collection and saved on potentially loading stuff that we don't need. So into this existing expression, in front of add columns, we can add in show columns. Now you'll see it's removed add columns. I need to re-add the add columns to keep this working. And then if I jump down to the bottom here, we should hopefully be able to define the columns that we want to display. So after the second last bracket, we can now specify the columns to display, and I want to display both the question column, which is the new column that we've created, and also the answers column. And with that, if I insert a final closing bracket, everything should be good, and we can see we now have our new data source coming up on screen. We have our answers as a table, the question as a single column there, and if we want to check that even more, we can jump across onto the left hand side into variables, and if we open up our collection, we can have a look at our table, and if we click into our answers, we can see here are our 4 answers for this particular question. And likewise, if I go into this one, we can see our 4 answers here, but these will of course be jumbled, and this will enable us now to produce a gallery with jumbled up answers. So if we jump back onto our gallery, we just need to update the data source from our original list to now our collection, which I've called call questions. You'll note that the title still comes through because it's based on .question, but our answers are based on a radio sample, and we can use this item .answers, which is our table of answers, and you'll see those answers coming through. And if I just resize this here to fill the screen, we can now see we've got the 4 answers based on each of those questions coming through. Now, in order to demonstrate the fact that these answers get jumbled every time you navigate between the screens, if you have a look, we've got create custom apps as number 1 and provide business intelligence and data visualization as number 2. If I jump to screen 2 and then back to screen 1, we'll see that's all been shuffled. And again, if I do that, jumping to screen 2 and jumping to screen 1, again it's been shuffled, because every time that screen is loaded we run the onVisible and we clear that collection and we shuffle those answers. So every user is going to get a different experience. Those answers will be in a different order, but we'll still be able to validate the answer that they select using the SharePoint list as our data source and looking at answer A. So if I play this app, I can now go and make some selections, choose some answers based on the questions that are displayed on screen, but I've got no way to check what the score is. So let's now build that out as part of the next feature. So I'm going to insert a button, and that button will enable the user to confirm that they've completed. I'll put that at the bottom of the application here, and I can rename that, or rename the text at least, to submit. If we change the name of that button on the left hand side, call that BTN submit, and then we're going to work on an expression. So on the onSelect property, we want to do a calculation, and that's going to be based on a count to see how many of those answers are correct. And then we can divide the number of answers that are correct by the number of questions that are in the gallery. So in order to count the number of correct questions that have been answered, I'm going to use COUNTIF, and that COUNTIF is going to be based on our gallery of our quiz. I'm going to have a look at all the items within that quiz, and then I'm going to filter it based on our radio control that we've inserted for our quiz answers and the selected.answer that they provided, to see if it matches with the lookup value of our data source on our SharePoint site, or indeed our questions list that we have. So we have our questions list. I'm going to put in a comma here, and then we're going to check to see if the title of that is equal to the question of our quiz answers. And with that, we're going to return the answer A, which we know is the correct answer, and close that off. So that should then give me the correct number of answers, and we can see already based on that expression I've only got one of those answers correct. Now, because I've got 5 questions, that's 20%. I would want to divide that by 5, and I can put a divide in, and if I use the gallery for the quiz, I can then use the property for the all items count and multiply that by 1,000, and we now will have a percentage. So if I select that whole expression, we should see I've got 20% of the quiz correct. Now, in order to make things even easier, it would be useful if we stored this in a variable. I'm going to use the update context and create a local variable for this, and we will call this the LOC quiz score. And with that LOC quiz score, if I just put in a semicolon, go to the very end of our expression, I need to put in the closing curly bracket and the closing rounded bracket. We now have a submit button that will calculate the score based on selecting that button. Now, the other thing I'm going to do at this point is to also define an update context for another local variable, which is going to be called visibility, or LOC visible, and I'm going to use this as a true or false to show or hide your score. So at the moment, the visibility will be true when you hit the submit button, but it'll be false before you hit the submit button, and we'll apply that variable to the visibility of something later on as we build this app. So to be continued with this particular variable it'll be set to true when you hit submit, and we will show someone's score based on that value being set to true. So next I'm going to add in a couple of containers, and we're going to use containers to store 1, the gallery, but 2, the pop-up that will tell us what our final score is as a result of completing our quiz. So I'm going to resize that to fill most of the screen, and then I'm going to move the gallery into this particular container. But before I do that, I'm just going to add in a bit of drop shadow, because that seems to be the current trend right now. I'll add in a border of maybe 5 and a border radius. We'll up that to 20, and that will give us a nice curve on our container. And then I'll rename that as well to CNT quiz questions. And with that container created, I'm then going to select it, Control C and Control V to create a copy, albeit I don't want it nested like that, like we see in the tree. So I'll Control Z to undo, select the screen one and Control V so that it's just at the same level here. And then I'm going to rename this to Control Quiz Score, and we can use this container to show and hide using that variable that I just defined. So with both of those containers created, ideally I would like one to sit on top of the other, so I can do that and drag and drop. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the gallery for the quiz. I'm going to Control X, which will remove it from the app. And then I'm going to select the container for the quiz questions and Control V, and that will insert our gallery into that container, and it's filled it out nicely. So that's fitting into place, which is superb. So the plan is now, when you hit the submit button, we will display our container with the score. It would be good to give that container a fill color. So I'm going to go with a gray, and you'll see that has already hidden our quiz questions, so we can't see the gallery right now. So with this container selected, if I go to the visibility property here and set this to our new local variable that I've defined for local visible, because it's not set, it's currently blank, it's therefore not true, it's not visible. And if I play the app and hit the submit button, we should see that container now come up on top. And of course we can then add a button to close this and then potentially reset the form controls so that you can take the test once more. So we go back into edit. If we select the container and go into assert, we can go and add in a text label. And if we bring that across the whole screen here and maybe up the size of the text to 25, maybe make it bold, I can then congratulate or commiserate someone with the outcome of their quiz score. So what we can do here is we can use an if expression. And so if our local quiz score is greater than 75%, then we can use the inline string concatenation, and we can say, congratulations, you passed with, if we open with a curly bracket, we can then insert our quiz score that we've created and put a percentage sign at the end. So this is the message that someone will get if they've completed it with greater than 75%. And unfortunately, if they did not complete it with 75% or more, we can say, unfortunately, you didn't make the grade with, and again, we can insert that quiz score and close all that off. Make sure I get my double quotes. There we go. So unfortunately you did not make the grade. I'll center that as well. So it'd be quite nice to also insert a button, because we'd like to be able to close that. So I'll insert another button and we can add that here, and we can rename it to close. And for good practice, if I rename this to button close and this one here to label result, again it'll make our life easier with our app development. Now on this close button, if we go and update the expression on the onSelect, we can use the update context, and we can update our local variable, which we've set to visible, to false, and close bracket there. And what will happen now is if we play the app, we can go and make a selection on all of the questions and answers. We can hit submit. Our calculation is made, we've got 60%, and if I hit the close button, because we set that to false, that'll then close the container and we're ready to go and have a look at our form. But the next thing I'd like to do is actually to reset this form, as well as only show and hide the submit button when someone doesn't have their score on screen. So quite easily, if we go onto the submit button and if we go to the visibility, all we want to do is to update this to not local visible, and of course when the container with the score is showing, we won't see the button, and when it isn't showing, we will see the button. And again, just to test that, if I hit close, we can see the submit button. If I hit the submit button, you can see it disappears. Now, in order to reset the gallery or to reset the individual controls, I'm going to go into this button here and add in a bit more code and use some variables. So the first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to reset my gallery so that we don't see what those previous answers were, and maybe you've got a different requirement, but we'll go with the reset at the moment. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to use the update context in order to reset our radio controls that are within that gallery also, because they're a separate control. So I can define a local variable called LOC reset, and if we set that to true and then switch it back immediately to false, we can use that in our reset property of our radio control. So I'm highlighting this expression, I'm going to insert a semicolon and paste that in. Both of them are currently set to true, but the order is to set one to true and one to false. And then we can use this LOC reset on our gallery within our radio quiz answers. And if I go into the property for reset, we can set that to LOC reset, and this will toggle between true and false. And if we now play the app, I can close it. You can see that that gallery resets. I can go and make some selections. And when I hit submit, we'll get, I didn't make the grade, but if I hit close, all those answers are reset and we can have another go. The final thing that I'd like to do, just to tidy things up, is to only make this button here active when you've made answers for all of the questions. And we can do that by doing a simple count. So if I select that submit button, and if I go and have a look at a property called display mode, at the moment it's set to edit, but I'm going to add in an expression here that checks to see if the number of selected values in the gallery is equal to the number of items in the gallery. And if it is, then we'll show edit. If we're not, we will show disabled. And just to show you what happens when I switch between edit and disabled, at the moment it's an edit, it's blue, it's active. If I change it to disabled, we will see it grey out, it's not active, I can't click on that button. So we're going to create some logic based on an if. We'll open that up and we're going to do a count rows. I'm going to count the rows based on a filter. So using the filter function, if I open that up here, it's going to be based on the gallery quiz, and we're going to have a look at all the items, and we're going to do a check where the radio control is not blank. So we're going to do is not blank with the exclamation mark at the front. And then we're going to get the radio control answers, we're going to get the selected value, and if we close that off, that will count the number of items that are not blank. Now with that in place, and if I put another closing bracket, I'm going to see if it's greater than or equal to the number of items in the gallery. We'll use gallery quiz.allItemsCount, and if it's greater than or equal to, i.e. 5 in this case, we can use the display mode for edit, and if it's not, i.e. not all the answers have been filled out, then we can use the display mode dot disabled and close that off. And if I play the app now, we can see that that button is disabled. I can't click on it, and as I go through and make selections for each of those questions, once I've answered all of them, I can then submit. And have I passed? Nope, still not passed. I've only got 40%. And then finally, because I promised we'll write back to our responses list, again with that button selected, if we go to the onSelect property, we can expand this expression bar here, and if we insert a patch, we can patch to our responses list, and that will be based on a title where we'll use the user.fullname. And then we'll also patch in their score, and that will be based on their LOC quiz score. So with the closing bracket and closing rounded bracket, we now have that expression in place. And if we give this app one last turn, try and get 100%, the primary purpose of Power BI is business intelligence. Which component is used for automating tasks? Well, of course, my favorite. What is Power Apps primarily used for? It's for building custom business apps. Which Power Platform component allows you to create chatbots? Copilot Studio. And what is Dataverse used for? to store and manage data securely. So if I submit this, I'm hopeful I'll have 100%. I passed with 100%, and I've got a little typo there. But if I jump across into my responses, we'll see that the response has now stored my name and the score into our responses list. So just to further demonstrate the power of this, because it's completely dynamic, if I was to go into edit and grid view and add in a new question, and that question can be, have you subscribed to my YouTube channel? And of course, the first answer is going to be, of course I have, exclamation mark, no, who is Damo, and not yet. By saving this list, if I jump back into my Power App and if I go and refresh this data source, so our questions, if I then navigate off of that screen and navigate back onto that screen as if I'd reset the app and play it, if I scroll down to the bottom, you'll now see that I have that question, have you subscribed to my YouTube channel, with the correct answer in position 3. Of course I have. And so thinking about how I could further extend this demo, I spoke about it earlier on in today's video. I could, of course, categorize these questions so you could have multiple quizzes in the one app. We could make those quizzes available to all. We could make it available to just certain groups of people. And because it's all dynamic, you do not need to go and maintain all of these Microsoft forms. You can trigger other processes like sending off congratulations emails, or maybe links to training materials if someone's failed to understand the quiz. The other option we've got available to us is we could potentially use something like ChatGPT to construct these questions and answers for us. So maybe using a subject or using a data source like a Microsoft Learn documentation, and from that we could use GPT to construct a series of questions and therefore a dynamic quiz, and with that quiz response enable someone to validate their understanding of a document. And not only does that have to be Microsoft Learn, this could be your internal policies and procedures to make sure that folk have understood what the new updates are and they can get a completely dynamic quiz based on the data source that you have provided, either via data source or potentially, like I say, via GPT. So if that's something that you would like me to explore further, I'd love to hear in the comments. What ideas have you got? Could you use this yourself? And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon.